So welcome to everyone for joining us today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dominic Golding. I'm Director of the Nantucket Project Centre, as we like to call it, back at WPI. My colleague Reinhold Ludwig is here as co-advisor with me this year, and we're delighted to present to you today all the work that the students have been doing over the last 7 weeks. Whilst we wait for people to trickle in before the students start, I thought I'd just recap some of the basics of the Project Centre. WPI, for those of you that don't know, operates now about 35 project centres around the world, depending how you count them. We've been running project centres in various places for more than 30 years, starting first in DC, London, and then elsewhere. And Nantucket is one of our more recent project centres, but we love it dearly. This shows basically how we've grown since the project centre started in 2008. Mike Elms, who is in the School of Management at WPI, actually a good friend of Bill Tramposh. Bill Tramposh encouraged him to come down to the island and set up a project centre, so he did. And then he ran away to New Zealand. And I took over in 2009. We had a little bit of a hiatus there because we wanted to run the projects in 2008, see how they were received on the island, see how the students received them, and so on and so forth. And because we have a year lag time in our recruiting and so forth, we ended up taking a year off, but decided that yes, this was a place that it could work. People seemed to want us to come back, and so we did, and we've been coming back for the last 6 years. And as you can see from the graph, typically we do 6 projects a year. This year we've got 7. We've increased over the years to complement the students that we bring to the island, and so we're up to about 22 students now. Our full complement is 24, so if we don't lose any along the way, we may have 24 students with us next year. Okay. Oops. Oh, good job. This is so we've done over the course of since 2008. We've had 40 projects in total. 129 students have come through the program, and the projects divide up basically in this fashion. You can see that most of the projects that we've done have been with the town of Nantucket. We've done several projects with different museums, Mariah Mitchell, the NHA. And we've done projects with other non-profits such as Housing Nantucket. And we've got a couple of people this year that we haven't worked with before, but we'll talk about that in a little while. I'm always open to new ideas for projects, so if anybody's got a thought about a project they think might fly, please do get in touch with me. I'll actually be back on island the end of May, beginning of June, to talk to people about what projects might be set up for the fall. I'd like to take the moment, students will probably give their thanks too, but I'd like to thank all the people who've helped us this past 7 weeks, all of the sponsors of the 7 projects that we have installed for you today. I'd like to thank Mariah Mitchell and the staff there for putting up with our students. By all accounts, they've behaved themselves, so I'm assuming we'll be back next year. They haven't thrown us out yet. I'd like to thank Harvey Young, who very generously every year that we've been here has provided all of us with bicycles, which is a fantastic way to get about the island, especially when we've had such beautiful weather as we have had this fall. So Harvey and all his staff at Young's Bicycle Shop, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'd like to thank the Lisa Lazarus, who set up a special tour for us at the Shipwreck Museum, which the students seem to love. And Dick Mack was our guide on that, telling us wonderful stories, so thank you to them. I'd also like to thank the NHA, who gave us all complimentary tickets so the students could get in and take a look at the Whaling Museum whilst they were here. And finally, I'd like to thank Remain Nantucket. This was the first time and they walk in on cue. Rachel Hobart, thank you. Remain Nantucket allowed us to use the Greenhound building downtown, which has been a great base for our students. As you all know, space on Nantucket is pretty limited, whether you're building a house or trying to get students into an office. And so we were lucky to have the Greenhound, courtesy of Remain, for our students to work out of over the past 7 weeks. There's obviously lots of other people I could thank, but I don't want to take up too much time. Everybody who's interacted with the students, I thank you all for making them also welcome, and for making Reinhold and I welcome also. The project reports will be posted on the WPI website. The proceedings are being filmed by Channel 18 today, so you'll be able to see that in due course. They'll splice in the PowerPoint slides as well as audio and video of the presentations themselves. The Nantucket Project Center website will also have copies of the reports and copies of the presentations. So if you know people who wanted to see particular things, or you want to go back and retrieve some of the information, those are probably the best places to go and find them. So I guess without further ado, if I can remember who's up first. Okay, if Liz, Nee, and Taylor would like to come forward. They've been working with ANCUSPA and the folks at Housing Nantucket. Affordable housing on the island obviously is a key issue, as all of you know, and they're going to tell you what they've been researching whilst they were here. Who needs the remote?
Yep, that one.
Hello, we are Team Housing Nantucket. My name is Taylor York.
I'm Elizabeth Beasley.
And I'm Nifan.
And our project is, should Housing Nantucket become certified as a community development corporation? So to give a little background, our sponsor, Housing Nantucket, has been on the island for the past 20 years, and their goal is to provide affordable housing to the residents of Nantucket, specifically the year-round residents of Nantucket. To do this, they offer 3 programs in particular. The first one is the rental unit program, which currently houses 30 tenants. They also have the Covenant Home program, which houses 59 families, and the Homebuyer Education program.
So affordable housing is a major issue on Nantucket. On Nantucket, roughly 40% of renters and 55% of homeowners struggle to pay their rent or mortgage. Additionally, the median home price in 2014 was almost $2 million. This high cost means that homeownership is prohibitive to 90% of year-round residents.
So the main goal of our project was to determine if Housing Nantucket should apply to become a community development corporation, otherwise known as a CDC. To break up our main goal, we made 3 objectives. The first objective is to clarify the CDC application process. The second objective was to identify the best practices of CDCs, and the final objective was to analyze the community investment plans of these CDCs. So, what is a community development corporation? A community development corporation is a nonprofit organization that focuses on fixing several social issues in their community. To become a community development corporation, one has to apply through the Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known as the DHCD. The DHCD also oversees all funding transactions for community development corporations. Once one becomes a community development corporation in Massachusetts, they join the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations, otherwise known as the MACDC. The MACDC oversees all CDCs in the state, which currently there are 55 and 0 on Nantucket. And they are in charge of keeping the social networking of CDCs. So, one good reason that Housing Nantucket should become a CDC is because it opens new doors to funding for them, such as the Community Investment Tax Credit program that CDCs are offered. The other reason they should join is because of the vast network of CDCs and to be able to gain great insight into programs that they could potentially use for their organization. So, the best practices of CDCs. To determine these, we did two things. The first one is we interviewed representatives of CDCs, and the second is we attended the MA-CDC conference. From the interviews, we determined that the majority of CDCs start off as nonprofit organizations, and for the most part, they were ready to become CDCs from the start. We also determined from the MA-CDC conference that the three main areas that CDCs need to focus on are lobbying, succession planning, and event planning. We also determined that CDCs generally focus beyond physical development and more so on interpersonal relationships in their community.
So this brings up a great question. Is the MA-CDC's mission identical to Housing Nantucket's? The short answer is no, not really. Housing Nantucket is brick and mortar oriented, and the MA-CDC is more focused on creating social connections. However, we don't see that as a big issue. We think Housing Nantucket should go for CDC certification. But first, they should just try to increase tenant involvement and increase community programs. So what happens after that? So as a CDC, they can apply for community investment tax credits. These credits are the funding that is the major motivation for becoming a CDC in the first place. So it starts off by a nonprofit becoming a CDC. Then the CDC can create a 3 to 5 year business plan. This business plan is called a community investment plan. So the plan is submitted to the Department of Housing and Community Development. They review the plan, and if they think that the organization is qualified, then they'll receive the credits.
So what are community investment tax credits? The CITC program allows donors who give to their local CDC up to 50% of their donation back as tax credits that can apply to their Massachusetts tax liability. Donations must be between $2,000 and $2 million, and these credits can be compounded with the charitable income tax deduction. Donors do not have to be local Massachusetts residents. They can be other businesses or other organizations even. The great thing about the CITC program is that they offer flexibility both to the donor and to the organization receiving them. Donors can contribute to their local organizations by deciding where their tax dollars go. For instance, local businesses can contribute to their local CDC and know that it's going towards affordable housing. With an organization like Housing Nantucket, the CITC donations offer a flexible source of funding that they can use for a variety of things, including staffing, construction projects, and other possible programs. The CITC credits can be allocated to one CDC is up to $150,000 worth of credits. This in total translates to $300,000 worth of donations per year for the next 3 years. So, in order to apply for this program, we looked at community investment plans of 8 CIPs across Massachusetts. We found 2 main findings. First off, community involvement is integral for a CDC. Not only should boards be diverse and involved, CDCs often have community outreach programs in the area. A second point that we found was that CDCs must demonstrate capable funding to prove that if they do get CITC credits, they can sell most, if not all of them. Many CDCs demonstrate this by not only hosting fundraising events, but also partnering with other local businesses. So if Housing Nantucket were to receive community investment credits, what would they spend it on? Our team conducted a needs assessment by interviewing and surveying many stakeholders, which include tenants, board members, and other local leaders. We found our findings in 3 main areas. First off, we interviewed many tenants and also surveyed them and found out that many tenants are very grateful for Housing Nantucket and the work that they do, so much so that they would be willing to volunteer their time and skills should the organization choose to have a community service event. However, there are several maintenance issues, mainly doors and windows, that must be addressed. A second finding was that we looked at Housing Nantucket as an organization overall. We found that Housing Nantucket needs to increase community outreach and visibility. They need to create a solid business plan that would carry their longevity for the next 3 to 5 years, And finally, they need to provide more opportunities for the community to give back to an organization that has done so much. Finally, we looked at the community of Nantucket at large. After attending the Civic Forum, we found that there was a great need for seasonal housing on Nantucket. Some have suggested that an organization like Housing Nantucket take upon the job as being a clearinghouse for seasonal workers. However, we determined that this would be close to impossible should the organization not receive more funding, more staff, and more resources. So our recommendations for investment overall are: first, expand fundraising; second, continue construction projects and maintenance of housing units that Housing Nantucket already owns; and finally, increase community outreach.
So in summary, Housing Nantucket should pursue the CDC certification. However, it should hold off a little before it pursues the community investment tax credits. First, it should consider developing new community programs and solidifying a reliable source of private funding.
Are there any questions? Yes, in the back. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So
The
We can explain this. If you want to go to the next slide, we can explain.
The tax deductibility applies to the donor. So, as mentioned, you can donate to a CDC, but the CITC program can be compounded with the charitable income tax deduction. So think of it as a 2-for-1. So, for instance, overall, you would pay a lot less than with the charitable income deduction alone. So we have an example here, if it would help. Somebody has a $5,000 tax liability they have to pay to Massachusetts. They donate $2,200 to the local CDC. The $1,100 back they receive as tax credits go towards the $5,000 tax liability. However, they can also get more of a deduction if they compound it with the charitable income tax deduction. So that $1,100 is actually more, and it has to be calculated for the specific person. You're welcome. Yes?
If I understand this correctly, and I'm looking at it now just from the narrow perspective of a wealthy person who has a philanthropic instinct but is looking to maximize the tax benefit, what I'm getting here is kind of a double-barrel effect. I'm, first of all, getting a tax deduction, which you get for donating to charity. So if I have $5,000, I give it to a charity, I get a $5,000 tax deduction for giving the deduction. But also what I'm doing in effect, if I've got this right, is I am essentially funneling the pool of Massachusetts taxes paid by everyone and directing it toward the community that I'm giving my donation to. And the price of my doing that is, you're saying, if you give $1, 50 cents of all Massachusetts taxpayers' money are being directed to this specific community, not spread over the entire Commonwealth. So, in that sense, and I'm trying to understand if I got this right. What this is really doing is it's rapidly capitalizing a large pool of money that can be used to accelerate the construction of affordable housing in my community where I'm making the donation. And incidentally, I'm getting the big tax credit with Massachusetts also. So it seems like a deal that's too good to be true. Just wondering what more communities are doing.
So that is exactly right. You're correct in everything you just said. The one constraint for it is that one CDC can only get up to a certain amount of tax credits. So they will go up to, and it also depends on your application to the DHCD. And if they determine that you are a good enough organization to receive full funding, you can get up to $150,000 of these tax credits. And you can only hand out that many. So if somebody were to come up and give a donation of about, let's say, $2 million, they would only get tax credits up to $150,000.
Unless they donate to multiple CDCs, which can be done.
Yeah. Yes.
What are the type of community events that Housing Nantucket should engage in
they could participate in several different events. So the main idea is to try and get Housing Nantucket's name out there more than to actually do, like, let's see. So let's say they put on an event with the high school students. So they could do an educational program with them about maybe housing, or they could take some volunteers, they could go into another community and they could say, or another area in Nantucket, maybe clean it up, do something like that. So the idea of the community events is more so to just get the name of your organization out there and spread out between the residents.
CDCs often promote community bonding. One such idea we heard was to rent Nantucket Ice and just invite everybody to come there, possibly talk with each other, because we hope to have the tenants and those who have helped Housing Nantucket get to know each other. Because at this point, there isn't a real community sense in that respect, if that makes any sense. All right. Any more questions? Yes.
So I understand it's a legislature
Mm-hmm.
that's been passed.
Yep.
Is there every certain number of years that that needs to get repassed by certain branches of our government? Can you talk a little bit about that?
From what I believe, it's supposed. The current CITC program is supposed to end in 2019. However, after talking to the MACDC, which works closely with legislators down on Beacon Hill, it seems that most likely, due to the high success of this program, it will be renewed. Any other questions?
And there's one more thing. So these $150,000 tax credits are renewed yearly. So they apply for over a 3-year span, and they don't have to reapply for another 3 years after that. But every single year they have $150,000 accessible to them.
If you have any more questions about the CDC,
Yes.
One more question.
One more question. You made a recommendation in the last slide that they should go for the application to become a type of organization and
Yes.
hold off on the process for the tax credits. Could you just clarify that a little?
Yeah. Do you want
Okay, I'll take it. So not all CDCs get the tax credits. However, we believe Housing Nantucket is ready to apply to become a CDC due to the way that they're organized right now. However, because the CDC application process is typically non-competitive, the CITC application process, however, is very competitive. You have, I believe, over 40 CDCs across the state competing for this one pool of money.
So the way that they do it is through the community investment plan, they apply for the opportunity to get these credits. So the better your plan, so the more community outreach programs you do, the more involvement, the more of an impact, the more credits you'll receive.
So it's a timing issue.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's all we have for now. If you have any more questions or want to donate to Housing Nantucket, the Executive Director, Ann Kutzba, is right in the front right there. And feel free to look at Housing Nantucket's website. They do great work, and they're a great member of the community. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Our next team, if Shauna, Adam, and Paige want to come forward and queue up your slides. Shauna, Paige, and Adam have been working with Janet Schulte at the Chamber of Commerce, and they've been looking at how the members and various other people in the community view the Chamber and the services that it provides. And they will tell you all about what they've discovered over the past 7 weeks. Thanks very much.
All right, hello everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Paige Lamica.
I'm Shauna McGaskian.
And I'm Adam Weiss.
And we've been working with the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce to evaluate their services and member satisfaction. So, a brief history of Chambers of Commerce. Chambers of Commerce originated in Marseille, France in 1599. This form of chamber is a public law chamber. So what that means is that all of these chambers are government organizations. The presidents are elected by the government. But then in the United States, chambers of commerce were formed in 1912, and these are private law chambers of commerce. What that means is that they are not governmental organizations and that the presidents are elected either by the public or the members. So, the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce was founded in 1934. It represents about 700 businesses on the island, which is 27.3% of all businesses. They also recently have formed a formal partnership with the Nantucket Enquirer and Mirror to sponsor the Halloween parade as well as Stroll, which they've been doing for quite a long time.
So our goal is to see how the NICC could enhance its program and services to meet member needs and stakeholders' expectations. To do this, we broke it up into 4 objectives. The first one is to identify the best practices. The second is to assess the needs of the members. Third, evaluate satisfaction with the Chamber of Commerce. And the fourth is to recommend improvements. We collected data in 3 forms. First was the public survey, which we went out during the Halloween parade and Stroll weekend with a paper survey, and we handed it out to the people in Nantucket to ask them how they thought about the chamber. The second was a member survey, which was done electronically and sent out to the members of the Chamber of Commerce. And the third were in-person and phone interviews with various people of the community, including members and non-members.
So as we talked to the people, the 66 people that we took our member survey and the 206 people that took the public survey, we found that they had a very positive view of the chamber. When we asked them on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is that they strongly agreed, that how they felt that the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce has a positive impact in the community, it was overwhelmingly positive, and the average was a 4.3 out of 5. We also found that it was very highly skewed, and as you went from the 5 to the 4 to the 3, less and less people, and the vast majority of them were 5s and 4s. We also asked the members how they felt about the current membership fee. We once again got a very strong positive reaction and found that over 75%, 76% in fact, had found that they thought that the fee represented a good value for their business. In fact, we had more people that felt that they were unsure about the fee than people who felt that it was a bad deal for them. Of the 206 surveys that we did on Stroll and Halloween, the vast majority of them were either tourist or year-round residents. However, we did have a fair amount of seasonal residents as well. They had a wide range in how much they knew about the chamber and what events they put on. We found that those who had been on the island the longest and the year-round residents knew more typically than seasonal or tourists did. When we talked to the members, we once again got a very positive response and found that people knew more about the chamber than the public did and were aware of its various functions. One thing that we asked them was to evaluate some of the various services that the Chamber of Commerce provides to get a general sense of which ones they use and which ones they find benefit them the most. Specifically, we asked them about the guidebook, score, off-island advertising, the chamber website, networking events, and workshops. Of them, the networking events were rated the most highly. We also asked them to try to identify the relationship between the Visitor Service Center and the Chamber of Commerce. The Visitor Service Center offers some services that are similar to the Chamber, but they are two different organizations. However, many people got confused and thought that they were similar or thought that they were the same organization entirely. This first row represents people who thought that they were the same organization, with members on the left and non-members on the right. The next row, which is the correct answer, is different organizations that work together. These we found most people were able to correctly identify this. However, there were still a large number of people who were unsure. No relationship is the third category, which once again is lower than different organizations that work together. And then the last category is don't know.
So, in addition to our 2 surveys, we also conducted 21 interviews to receive candid stories to support the findings from our surveys. As you can see on the right, there's a chart which represents our 21 interviewees with their names retracted. These interviewees consist of members, non-members, and the Chamber of Commerce staff. In this graph, A Y represents yes, this is a topic that was discussed. N represents no, this was a topic that they did not feel was an issue or a concern. And a dash means that it wasn't applicable. So for example, a business of 1 does not face any sort of seasonal housing issues. Along with this, there is a word cloud of the most commonly occurring quotes from our interviews. So with these 2 surveys and our interviews, we formed 3 main recommendations for the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce. These recommendations are that they take steps to improve their website, that they improve their member events, and that they conduct an educational program on both the topics of housing and energy.
So our first recommendation was to redesign the website. As you can see here, this is the Chamber website, the front page. And this iteration of the website is probably one of the best versions the Chamber's had so far. However, there are still some issues. First, it needs to be a little bit more user-friendly. A lot of information gets buried in the various tabs, and a lot of people don't know where to go looking to find the information they want. Next is also that it needs to be a little bit more mobile-friendly. The picture you see here is a picture from one of our own phones. As you can see, it's a little messy, but then again, anything can be fixed, and it'll be all good and pretty. Finally, to try to stay local with the designer. The Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce website, as you can see, isn't very Nantucket themed. And the person who designed the website wasn't very aware of Nantucket. Also, the designers aren't in the same time zone, so when the Chamber has problems with it, they're unable to get the customer service they need. So the Chamber is well aware that the website needs a little bit of work. In fact, the Chamber is currently looking into people to help fix the website. And by the time their multi-year contract will be up, they'll be able to hit the ground running and give Nantucket the best Chamber website it deserves. Our other recommendation is to fix some of the member events. As you can see, member events are probably the most well-received things that the Chamber does for its members. 64% of the members that we asked were very happy with the number of workshops interviewed. In fact, more people would rather have more workshops than have less. Of course, a lot of people wanted different topics. I can see by this graph, the top 3 graphics wanted were social media topics wanted were social media skills, small business strategies, and employee relations. Also, we have recommendations for energy and housing ones, which you'll hear a little bit later. Another idea we had to recommend were webinars. A lot of the members are either off island when these workshops are happening or are busy, especially when they are solo business. Our recommendation for webinars, which are lectures and workshops that are recorded or broadcasted, would be to give this a shot, to try to see if it works for the members and see if it's something that they want and would be very helpful. Finally, the Business After Hours. The Business After Hours is probably one of the best and most received events that the Chamber does for its members. Basically what it is the Chamber runs this event at a local business that volunteers, and members go to it and hear a little bit about the business and maybe see a business they may have never seen or thought of before. A lot of people during our interviews thought that they're not the crowd for this. It's the same people over and over again, and they feel a little awkward stepping in. So our recommendations is to target different demographics, maybe specific businesses, like services or merchants, new members, or even non-members.
Our next recommendation deals with energy. As the next group will discuss, energy is currently a large issue on the island, specifically the energy consumption of it. We spoke to a National Grid representative about what she thought we could do to best benefit the Chamber and help the Chamber benefit the town. We ultimately decided that we think that the best way to do this is to have the National Grid organize a workshop which will be put on and advertised by the Chamber. Hopefully, this will be able to attract a large number of businesses, many of whom are already trying to take steps to go green, and will encourage others to join in. Currently, about 30% of energy use on the island stems from commercial use, and we're hoping to help that number drop so that we can have more energy. Additionally, the guidebook for next year, the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce guidebook, will have a theme about conservation, and green energy will be a part of that. That is also going to hopefully encourage more businesses to realize that they need to start making steps to make Nantucket green.
And as a final recommendation, we recommend that the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce consider sponsoring educational programming on the topic of housing. 15 out of 16 interviewees, or 94%, believe that housing is a huge issue. And our interviewees are very aware that the Chamber of Commerce does not necessarily need to take a political stance on this. However, the best approach would be to facilitate discussion on the issues. We would like to thank our sponsor, Dr. Janet Schulte, and we would also like to thank our project advisors, Dominic Golding and Reinhold Ludwig. Thank you very much. And do you guys have any questions? Yes.
I know based on your research that you did some comparisons with other chambers. You talked a little bit about how the Nantucket Chamber stands up against other small tourist-based chambers of commerce.
Yeah,
I can
would you
talk
like to-
about that.
Okay.
So we tried to get in contact with several other chambers of commerce in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, not as many of them responded as we would like, but we were still able to get a general sense of how it compares. A lot of the events and services that the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce puts on are offered by several other businesses. A lot of the other chambers, depending on if they're a tourism-based economy, some of them focus more on catering to tourists, others more to industry. Nantucket, as I said earlier, does cover a lot of them, advertising being the big one, recommendations, workshops, just trying to help the businesses improve and stay connected with each other.
They do not. So out of all of the chambers that we researched, no other chamber faced such a housing crisis. We looked at places like Salem, Nova Scotia, Martha's Vineyard, and housing was not at all touched by those chambers of commerce. However, energy is sort of becoming an issue, but currently in the chambers we studied, they had no long-term programs except for the programs that already exist, such as Mass Save, which is only applicable to like Martha's Vineyard here. Did you have a question?
In your work that I don't see the word energy, so I was wondering where that entered into research and how you pursue that path and why, if there was any coordination with the energy research team, because you seem to be on it.
Yeah, so basically, the energy research team also worked with our sponsor to talk about how the chamber could get involved in helping small businesses realize the impact they have. And by going green, they're going to save money, and there's benefits for these businesses. So our interviewees, I would say, were vastly unaware that this was sort of an upcoming topic. That's why it's not reflected in the word cloud, because there were no quotable quotes about energy. However, it absolutely is an issue, and I do feel as though it needs to be discussed. And I think that that actually sums up the problem, is that we did 21 interviews and it didn't come up, except for us asking it. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, moving on. I guess moving on from energy to energy was the end of that presentation. The next project was Eric, Kevin, and Leanne, who were working with Lawrence Sinatra in the Energy Office, looking at energy awareness on Nantucket. So I won't steal their thunder. I'll let them tell you what they found.
Okay, so we worked with Lawrence Sinatra from the Town of Nantucket Energy Office. I'm Leanne Sickles.
I'm Frederick Burgwart.
And I'm Kevin Maynard.
So over the past few years, demand for electricity has been steadily increasing, resulting in the need for an additional undersea cable. Currently, the town of Nantucket is supplied electricity through 2 undersea transmission cables, which provide 76 megawatts of power. In the graph, the green line represents the capacity of one cable plus on-island generation, and the orange line represents the capacity of both cables combined. Beginning in 2013, the demand for electricity surpassed the supply capability of one cable. Originally, the second cable was installed as a backup if the first cable were to malfunction. Since residents now rely on both cables to supply electricity, National Grid has proposed that a third cable be installed. This would likely increase ratepayers' electric bills as they are still currently paying for the first 2 cables. In order to defer the need for the third cable, the Town Energy Office and National Grid are working together to implement energy-saving programs. To aid in their efforts, our goal was to identify ways to increase public awareness about cost-saving and energy reduction initiatives. To do this, our first objective was to identify lessons learned from past approaches to enhance cost and energy-saving initiatives. To do this, we conducted interviews and background research with representatives from other communities. We first looked at Worcester's Smart Grid pilot program, which involved installing 15,000 smart meters, which allow customers to track their electric usage and hopefully help them reduce their consumption to save money. As part of the program, National Grid built a sustainability hub, which is depicted in the photo, to help engage and educate customers about the program. The hub displays energy-efficient appliances and energy-saving techniques. We also looked at the Mass Save program, which is available on Nantucket through National Grid. During the recent November audit week, we were able to shadow an auditor as they completed a home energy assessment. We learned about the process and identified commonly asked questions about the program. From this, we were able to determine how to increase participation and overall satisfaction with the program. We then looked at demand response, which is a program that will be initiated on the island in the coming years. Demand response is when the electric company has the ability to gradually increase or decrease the temperature setting on customers' thermostats during peak demand hours in order to reduce overall consumption. To learn more about this program, we interviewed with a manager from an electric company that has implemented this program before. And we found that demand response would be a good way to reduce electric costs and reduce peak demand load. Finally, we looked into municipal aggregation, a program that the Town Energy Office is looking to implement. Municipal aggregation is when the town decides to remove its residents from the default electric supplier, in this case National Grid, and purchase electricity on behalf of the community to receive lower electric rates. So we researched and conducted an interview with a consultant from the Colonial Power Group, which is a company that works with members of communities looking to implement municipal aggregation. We found that although it would work to reduce costs for residents, it would not help in deferring the need for the third cable.
Our second objective to completing our goal was to assess public knowledge and attitudes towards local energy issues and programs. This was done mainly through the use of a survey that we distributed and which we received almost 300 responses, thanks to the Nantucket Civic League. Our first category in the survey was general energy awareness, where we asked questions such as, do you know how Nantucket receives its electricity? Through this, we found that 73% of respondents knew that Nantucket receives its electricity through 2 undersea transmission cables. However, less than 50% were aware that they pay for it through a surcharge in their monthly electric bills. Furthermore, we looked into assessing knowledge about peak demand times and found that less than 50% are aware that electricity demand peaks during the hours of 5 to 10 p.m. And then finally, we looked at who are the major consumers of electricity, to which we found 62% of responses indicated that it was the large homes or those consuming more than 2,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. However, the correct answer was it's the medium and small size homes combined due to the number of homes on Nantucket. From this category, we were able to determine that residents are generally aware of how Nantucket gets its electricity. However, they are relatively unaware of how it's paid for and consumed both personally and island-wide. Our second category was reducing island-wide energy use. to which we first looked at awareness of the Mass Save program. 3 years ago, a previous IQP team evaluated the Mass Save program and found that awareness was below 50%. When we conducted our survey, we found almost 80% of respondents were aware of the Mass Save program. We also found that a majority of respondents were either satisfied or very satisfied with the program, proving that it is working and it is becoming more popular. We also asked if residents would be in favor of a demand response program and found that 44% indicated they would not be in favor. This was mainly due to concerns or misconceptions about privacy and security, or not being able to control your heat as you need it. From this category, we're able to determine that programs in place are proving successful. However, before any new programs can really start to unfold, more information to the public is needed. Our third category focused on National Grid and other electric utilities, beginning with, are you satisfied with your electric supplier? To which we found that above 80% of people are satisfied with their electric supplier. However, they would be willing to change if offered greener energy or lowered electric costs through a program such as municipal aggregation. We also asked them about the possibility of a community solar project, in which 85% of respondents indicated that they would be in favor of a project where they buy their energy at a reduced price from community-generated power. From this category, we were able to determine that while residents are satisfied with their current electric suppliers, they would be willing to change over if offered either greener or other alternatives that could save them money. And finally, our last section to our survey was energy marketing and outreach, to which we looked at, should there be a local sustainability hub on island? 85% of residents indicated that yes, there should be. And to that we respond that there already is. It's the Greenhouse Sustainability Hub located on Washington Street. It's not as in-depth as, say, the Worcester one. However, there is a lot of useful information provided along the walls, as well as a monitor to which you can watch videos about how to reduce energy, and also you can monitor the wind turbine at the high school. And finally, you could also just go to the energy office to learn more about power. Lauren Sinatra has a vast amount of knowledge that you can go and learn about all of these programs that we've previously mentioned, as well as help if you need help signing up for the Mass Save program. Our final question from this section of the survey, however, was how do participants prefer to receive information, to which we found among all age and residential status groups was through the Inquirer and Mirror and the Town of Nantucket website, with the Man About Town and AC Energy, or the Energy Office website, coming in third and fourth. From this section, we were able to determine that new information or previous media needs to be updated with more relevant information while new outreach materials are being developed.
Our third objective was to determine how local stakeholders could support the initiatives of the Town Energy Office. And we did this by interviewing local stakeholders at local groups and organizations. At first, we were able to find that they would help through information dissemination. For an example, we talked to the visitor services. They'd be able to display a potential rack card in their building, where they receive about 300 to 500 people a day during the peak summer months. In addition, they were open to the option of our ability to have a energy efficiency section in the yearly publishing of Nantucket. In addition, we found that people were open to the ideas of helping to plan events, such as the Chamber of Commerce. They were open to the idea of hosting a business after hours described in the previous presentation, where we could tailor this event to be able to highlight businesses that have energy efficient technology. In addition, when looking to place a community solar project, we would need a large amount of space, and we believe that the land bank would be able to provide that, as their mission is to maintain and own large open spaces. However, unfortunately, they would not be able to do that, as it is against the Land Bank Act that makes these spaces be open for public use. And finally, we looked at fundraising opportunities. Remain was open to the idea of funding an internship possibility at either the Greenhound building or the Town Energy Office to help with information distribution. And the Community Foundation for Nantucket was open to the idea of creating an energy efficiency fund for people who are looking to fund certain energy efficient projects. And our fourth and final objective, is to recommend ways to increase the public awareness and participation in cost-saving and energy-saving initiatives. And we did this. We would recommend the Town Energy Office to create a spotlight on the town website highlighting either home energy assessments or just energy-saving tips in general to help reduce your peak demand. In addition, we recommend that National Grid and the Town Energy Office tailor their energy outreach material specifically for Nantucket, so it really hits home with the residents on the island. We have created a brochure here, or a rack card, and I believe we'll be handing out rack cards right now. And if you would mind taking a look, or perhaps if you have a comment or anything, please feel free, if you have a pen, to write down any kind of comments or concerns you may have about the rack card, and then pass it along to the person next to you. We will also be here in the back if you have any other comments later. And additionally, we recommend that the Town Energy Office works with the Community Foundation for Nantucket to create an energy efficiency fund to help fund energy efficient projects on the island. And additionally, due to our positive feedback on our surveys, we recommend that the Town Energy Office continues to pursue municipal aggregation and a town community solar project. And finally, we recommend that the Town Energy Office continues to work with National Grid in order to create and develop outreach materials for energy projects and incentives. And in summary, the island of Nantucket is reaching a breaking point where they will need to build a third cable. And through our surveys, we have found that there are knowledge gaps between the residents on the island, and however they are open to new energy project ideas such as municipal aggregation or a town community solar project. And finally, we recommend that the Town Energy Office continues to partner with local groups and organizations to further distribute information. And finally, we'd like to thank our project sponsor, Lauren Sinatra, and our contact at National Grid, Lindsay Foley, our two project advisors, Dominic Golding and Reinhold Ludwig, and the Civic League for distributing our survey, and finally, our interviewees. And we'd like to thank you guys for coming out today. Do you guys have any questions?
Yes. Massachusetts is one of the few states that doesn't have a off-peak electric rates, so that folks can use electricity when it's not in high demand. And then further in Nantucket, we have 5 or 6 times as many people in the summer as we do in the winter. So while free cables are necessary in the summer, you probably only need half a cable in the winter. Mm-hmm. Why does Massachusetts not pursue off-demand, off-peak type rates so that people do that and save the need for excess capacity?
Well, one possibility is when we're looking through municipal aggregation, part of the contract could include time of rate demands, which would pretty much make it would be cheaper for people to use electricity during off-peak hours. In addition, if we were to do through municipal aggregation, we'd have a constant rate throughout the whole, was it 6 months or so? Every 6 months, so you could have a more constant rate.
Also, to add on to that, the Worcester Smart Grid pilot that we discussed, they implemented what they're called smart energy solutions. So they basically have 2 different payment methods where you can pay a basic service rate and then a conservation day fee, where on conservation days, which are days when peak demand rises, so they want you to use less electricity, they bump up the price of electricity per kilowatt hour about 5-fold. So it would go from about 7 cents to somewhere in the 30s or 40s cents per kilowatt hour. They also offer just basic time of use rates between, I believe it's 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. and then vice versa, where one time period has higher rates than the other. So that is starting to become, to kind of happen in Massachusetts. However, you really just need to find out where it would work best. Yes.
I didn't catch all of your summary of deploying the community on the aggregate. What was the question?
So the question was, or we gave a brief description of municipal aggregation, in that the town administration would remove its residents from their default electric provider. In this case, it would be National Grid. It is an opt-out program, and then they would basically put the town, I guess, up for bid, in which other utilities could bid for to become the town's main supplier at either a lower price. So our main information that we found from that was that just 5% said that they would not be willing to participate in a program such as this. And then we also gave them the option to select either, or like multiple categories, so either a greener power or lowered electric rates. So we found that people would be very willing to participate if offered either greener power or lowered electric rates, while only 5% said that they would not be willing to participate. Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this timely topic. And it seems to me the obvious place to put a solar farm is on people's roofs. It would not be in a concentrated area, but it would be diffuse. Not every roof would be acceptable, but perhaps a program where people were offered a low-interest loan or a no-interest loan. They pay back, by giving that power, they would, pay back like they would pay their electric bill. They just pay back the town or somebody who would put these panels on roofs. Therefore, we could, cut demand substantially. And I think the town should start to look at the roof of this building, and it looks like I'm not an expert on this, but it looks like it's got a huge south-facing side with nothing on it but shingles. And it seems like, why aren't there solar panels up there paying for the electricity that the town uses?
So, sorry. Yeah, no, it's fine. So regarding solar panels, especially on roofs, it can become a complicated topic, just because there are a lot of groups that want to preserve the appearance and the aesthetics of the island. So putting solar panels up on roofs can become a very controversial topic. So there are groups such as the HDC looking into alternatives, such as solar shingles, although a lot of complications arise with solar on the roof, and I'm sure a lot of people have probably come to either the energy office or to the town administration, kind of suggesting that these kind of programs happen. However, it's difficult getting by a lot of the groups that just want to preserve the appearance of the island. Yes. Yep.
I'm going to make a comment, and then perhaps you can comment back on it. From what I know about change management, the first thing that you have to establish when you're trying to create a change is an awareness that is necessary. Yes. And so I was wondering whether you had considered some kind of awareness quotient, whereby people could compare either the size of their house or the number of people who live in the house with their energy consumption. And then some bar or threshold that said, if you're above this number, why don't you call Lauren and get your assessment?
Yep. So something like that probably could be possible in conjunction with working with National Grid and like using the data from MassSave. When you sign up a lot of times for a MassSave audit, you do have to enter in, how many people are in your house. They measure the square footage of your home. They look at your electric bills to find out how much energy you use. So correlating that data to kind of develop outreach material to determine if you should talk with the energy office or what you should do for your house, that would be a very possible solution. And it would probably mainly involve working to kind of do something with the MassSave program.
Yeah, and the nature of my question, which you've sort of edged on, is how do you get people to pick up the phone in the first place? And that's to make them aware that they could save on energy.
Yeah. So we would, as far as solutions to that would go, we really need to, I guess, highlight specific cases in which energy savings has been really effective. So if there are, we had a few comments on our survey where people noted that through the Mass Save program, they're saving thousands of dollars a year, and all they had to do was get a new thermostat, replace some light bulbs, and maybe get some insulation. And all the rebates offered through programs such as Mass Save, they allow for this at relatively low cost, and so you get the low cost with the very high savings. So we could, I guess, implement it that way by trying to look at a cost benefit. So.
And that'd be another reason why we recommend that the Town Energy Office and National Grid specifically tailor this kind of marketing and outreach to Nantucket and try and get the problem out to the people so they know that they can do something to help this problem with the third cable.
Is there a smart thermostat as a result of Mass? And I've got all these LED lights, etc. I don't have access to my meter in terms of my daily needs and things like that. Is there a smart meter?
So no, there isn't a smart meter on Nantucket. So the Worcester project was based on implementing smart meters. This is not something that National Grid is looking to do on Nantucket. They are just looking to do the demand response program, in which the utility company would be in charge of adjusting the thermostat given your permission.
Seems like it's an opportunity to build awareness.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just following up on that. My question was about the demand response because, so would you explain a little bit how that works? As you mentioned privacy issues being concerned, and it sounds like if I were to give permission, I would allow National Grid to turn my thermostat down systematically from outside my house, say
Yes.
between 5 and 10.
Right.
So could you just say that?
That would be correct. So given your permission, they would ask your permission first. They would adjust your thermostat, mostly in the summertime, to increase the temperature by, say, about like 3 degrees over the course of 3 hours. And this would overall reduce demand while not really affecting the comfort level in your home. So it's completely I don't know.
And it also wouldn't be like a sudden thing where all of a sudden all your thermostats have changed. They usually tell you either like a week in advance or a few days in advance. They'll say, hey, there's a demand response program coming up. Try to conserve power. Sometimes they say, cook all your meals in advance. That way you're not using the stoves and everything during these hours. Depending on the time period it's at, they can recommend either that you're out of the house or something. That way it doesn't affect you. However, all they're doing when doing this project is they might bump up your thermostat a degree or two, which can actually translate into a large energy savings.
And you'd have the ability to turn it back down if you felt you were getting too warm or whatever. You still have the ability to turn it down.
So is that available now? And is that, because I don't recall ever being asked that, and I did the Mass Save.
Right.
Yes.
It's not available at this moment. National Grid is looking to implement the program in the coming years. I believe they do have a few volunteers at this point, but it hasn't been quite marketed as heavily as Mass Save has.
Yes.
To keep up our current growth in demand like it is now, and we just do minimal stuff to address it, how long do you estimate before we're going to leave it?
I believe it's 2030 is when we would absolutely need the cable on the island. I believe that's roughly the date. They're not too sure.
That was also based off of data provided from last year, basically. This past August, the demand actually surpassed even that of 2013, so it went past the 45 megawatts. So that may accelerate the need for third cable, which then really just enhances the fact that people need to start trying to save energy.
I can just let people know that on January 6th, we're going to be giving a presentation on this particular topic
says once you go over the 50% line with two cables, we have to start planning and getting ready to put in a third cable and putting in place another one of those $50 a month surcharges on your energy bill every month. It may not take effect until 2020 or 2030, but they're going to start doing the planning, and they're only going to pull the plug if we taper off the demand. And awareness is a big part of this, and I'm really delighted to see how awareness has increased since we first started with the Mass Save program, because it takes thousands of small actions to shave off that peak load. And all of it, as I understand it, all the technology is out there to do the things we're talking about. It's not done on Nantucket. Technology is being assessed in different communities, and I would really like to see another Worcester Polytech project next year on some of these projects that tie them together. That's maybe a comment to Donovan.
Yeah, we actually do address that in our final report. We do look at how future IQP teams could address some of these issues, such as further developing any kind of outreach material, or working to, I guess, further advertise either the Mass Save program, or one of our specific ones that we use is a specific plan for the Community Energy Efficiency Fund. So that would, just having that fund available would also help just people all over the island start projects to save. So, are there any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Okay, well, obviously a lot of interest in energy, not surprisingly. I guess it's been interesting to follow up on Peter's comment. Since we've been doing projects on the island, we've had a number of them dealing with energy, needless to say. Working with the Energy Studies Committee originally, working with Lauren in the last couple of years. And it's actually interesting to see how things have changed. So Mass Save, I remember, I don't know, Lauren, was it 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 3 years ago? We actually had some conversations in one of the projects. It wasn't directly about Mass Save, but it came up as to, well, why isn't Mass Save doing stuff on Nantucket? And Lauren obviously finally figured that out and got them over here. So that's been, and it's kind of interesting to see the awareness of Mass Save growing over the last 3 years. It sounds like from all that I pick up too that relations with National Grid are a lot better than they used to be as well. So hopefully things are moving in the right direction, and we're always happy to help in whatever way we can with the projects that we do here. So moving on, the next project is going to be looking at another problem that's going to be a growing problem in future years, which is storm surge and the impact of storm surge and storms in general on critical infrastructure on Nantucket. And the team that's going to talk about that, CC, who we got? CC, Brian, Sean and Matt at the back there. If they would come down, they've been working with Dave Franzuto and Peter Morrison on this, and they're going to tell us all that they've learned. Thank you.
All right, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sean Regan.
I'm Cece Cotter.
I'm Brian Bach.
I'm Matt Lapine.
And as mentioned, we worked with Dave Franzuto of the Emergency Management Agency, and we looked at storm surge and how it affects critical infrastructure on Nantucket. So just as a brief overview, we're going to go over just kind of the background of what storm surge is and how it applies to our goal and our area of interest. And then we'll go over some various steps in our methodology, findings, recommendations. We'll talk about what we're going to be leaving here on the island, and then just some general conclusions.
Less than a year ago, Nantucket was slammed with Winter Storm Juno, which was the largest storm in 25 years. There was a foot of snow and 78-mile-per-hour winds, but the biggest thing that people noticed was the flooding. During a severe storm, high winds and precipitation can be extremely destructive, but the greatest threat to life comes from the water in the form of storm surge. During a storm, an abnormal amount of water, which is the storm surge, is added to the normal tide to create what is called the storm tide. Juneau brought about the second highest tide since records began back in 1967, but that doesn't come as much of a surprise. Global climate change has been an exponentially increasing issue and has caused things like sea level rise and storms that are not only more frequent but also more powerful. 30 years ago, Juneau might have been considered what we call a 100-year storm, which is a storm that has a 1% chance, of hitting in any given year. It's basically the storm of the century. But in today's more volatile world, that's just not the case. There was a study done in 2005 in Boston that said that by the year 2050, what we now consider a 100-year storm will occur every 15 years. And if that's not enough, the study also said that what we will consider a 100-year storm in 2050 will be on par with what we now consider the storm of the millennium. With this in mind, we came to Nantucket, to help protect the island from a storm that has never been seen in recorded history, at least here on the island. As you can see, there's flooding. You can see the flooding here from Juneau compared with your average day. Juneau brought about a 7.2-foot tide. The storm that we've been preparing for will add another 3 feet onto that.
And there are two primary reasons for an increase in natural disaster-related losses: an increase in the amount of people and property in harm's way, as well as an increase in frequency of severe storms. Nantucket follows both of these trends, and therefore an action plan needs to be in place. It is of particular importance to start protecting critical infrastructure, as they affect a large population base and could have fatal consequences if inoperable. Critical infrastructure is best defined as any type of infrastructure that is essential to day-to-day functions and can be broken down to three main categories, being utilities, transportation, and built infrastructure.
So it's apparent that storm surge is a growing issue both in frequency and severity. So we made it our project goal to evaluate and identify different approaches that the town can take to protect its critical infrastructure from this damage due to storm surge.
So in our study of area of interest, we have Easton Street to the north, Center and Union Street to the west, and Goose Pond Trail to the south. And we also include the Natural Resource Department by Jetties Beach in the north. And so in this blue area, which is the velocity zone, and that's where the most wave action occurs, and the sanded color area, that's the 100-year zone, and the green colored area is the 500-year flood zone. And so the majority of our downtown area is in the 100-year flood zone. So we have listed a total of 26 critical pieces of infrastructure. Our built infrastructure is shown in red, which include the post office on Federal Street and also the town administrative building on Broad Street. Next, we have our transportation in purple, and that includes the the Children's Beach boat ramp, and also the steamboat wharf. And lastly, we have our utilities in yellow, which is the Goose Pond sewer main right by Goose Pond Trail and the Union Street telephone building.
With this critical infrastructure in mind, we took information we gained from our own independent research along with research or information given to us through interviews. We combined it with our own fieldwork and observations to get a sense of the town's critical infrastructure situation. We were also lucky enough to go on a few tours, including this one of the Coast Guard station down over near Bram Point. We looked at many different things when looking at critical infrastructure, but the biggest component was what we call the critical elevation, which is the elevation at which a piece of infrastructure would be either severely damaged or inoperable. For example, electric lines in a utilities piece of infrastructure or access to a building.
With our gathered data, we have performed a risk assessment and have assigned a corresponding letter and number value to each piece of critical infrastructure within our boundary. On one column, we have the likelihood, representing the likelihood of a piece of infrastructure being damaged in a 100-year flood, compared to the consequence of if that piece of infrastructure were to be inoperable. High at-risk pieces of infrastructure are marked in red, medium at-risk pieces of infrastructure are marked in orange, low risk in yellow, and white and very low. There are 7 pieces of high at-risk critical infrastructure within our boundary, 11 medium, 6 low, and 2 very low. I will now go through an example by using the Finance Department located at 37 Washington Street. The Finance Department has the Finance Department is likely to be flooded in a 100-year storm, and it has a moderate consequence if inoperable, so therefore it has been ranked 3B. It is likely to be flooded as it has a low base floor elevation, and it has historically been known to get flooding on the back part of the building in any major storm due to the town parking lot sloping down to the back part of the building. In any major storm, there will be several feet of water surrounding the building as well. As for the consequence, there are some files that are irreplaceable that could be damaged. However, they have the ability to be relocated prior to a storm, as well as staff and computers, in order to maintain functionality, as it is not essential that operations be carried out in that facility.
So once we were able to identify our pieces of infrastructure and how at risk we found that they were to be, we then had to recommend different strategies to mitigate this damage. And for our project, we had 3 main areas, which included elevation, floodproofing, and relocation of function. So elevation is just simply raising a structure off of its original foundation and picking up its base floor to be above what the floodplain would be during a 100-year storm. So this is a home that we saw while we were here. It's on Wall Street, which is just off of Easton, which was currently being elevated. And the next area is floodproofing, which can be both dry floodproofing or wet. And dry floodproofing is basically just preventing water from entering the structure, and that can be done by applying sealants to the foundation, wrapping the building, or putting walls or barriers around the entire structure. Wet floodproofing is a little bit different because it still allows water to enter the structure, but it minimizes the damage that it actually causes by protecting individual systems or components inside the structure that would be reduce the cost of damage. And here we see door dams that are used at the C Street pump station, which just protect the doorways and minimize the amount of water that can fit between the door and its door frame. And lastly, we had relocation of function, which is just simply moving critical equipment and components from an area that's at risk and moving it to a structure outside of the flood zone. So given these 3 main areas of mitigation, we came up with 6 different overarching recommendations that all of our infrastructure fit into. And we found that with a majority of our infrastructure, either due to their function or the service that they provide, they really can't be moved. So they were considered non-relocatable. And then for some of these, our recommendation was to elevate just to pick them up. And in other situations where if it's either too big or wouldn't be cost effective, just simple floodproofing would help prevent further damage. And yeah, sorry, that was Stop and Shop. The next category is infrastructure that can be relocated, but we recommend that the best course of action would be just to simply elevate it. And this is for a few of them, including the U.S. Coast Guard station out by Brant Point. And we also had 2 structures where relocation, moving to a different, safer location was the best, we believe, to be the best option. And for roads, there's many roads that are important to the downtown transport. And there is no immediate recommendation to implement mitigation strategies. But in the future, if roads are to be torn up, either to be repaved or to access utility lines underneath the roads, then we recommend repaving these roads to a higher elevation. And what that will do, it'll decrease the amount of floodwaters during less severe storms. And with less floodwaters, there's a lower frequency of impassability, especially for like emergency vehicles. And lastly, our final category is no further action, where we don't recommend to change the structures or move them at all, because the cost to do so doesn't really have any true benefit to what would be affected either by the structures or the likelihood of them being damaged.
So from the risk assessment and the mitigation tactics that we just talked about, we have set a list of priorities for all 26 of our pieces of infrastructure, and these are based on the risk and ease of mitigation. So our top 2 priorities are the C Street pump station and a Cannon Street substation. We deemed that these were the top 2 because they affect the most population in the most consequential way. If the C Street pump station were to go down for over an hour, there'd be raw sewage seeping into the streets. And if the Candle Street substation were to go down, then the whole island's electricity would go out. The reason why we deemed C Street Pump Station was number 1 is because it is at a lower elevation, which means that the critical components would be affected faster. So we have 2 main deliverables that we're going to be leaving on the island. One is a summary database, which in a physical form is going to be in a binder, which we're going to leave with our sponsor. It is also going to be available on the Nantucket WPI website. This database for all 26 of our pieces of infrastructure include the description, the risk assessment, and the recommendation on the first page. Second page will have our fieldwork data, and the third page will have our associated important pictures. Next, we put together a GIS database layer. GIS is a geographical information system, and it's a mapping tool that combines different types of data layers. We used floodplains and topography, and we also highlighted all 26 of our pieces of infrastructure. For example, if you click on one, like the Candle Street substation, a dialog box would pop up and it'll show the immediate information right there, especially in the case of an emergency. It also shows the binder page reference number in case you need to know more about that piece of infrastructure.
So this is where you come in. It's extremely important to be proactive, especially if you live or work near the ocean. If you haven't done so already, check out the FEMA flood maps that can be found on the Town of Nantucket website under the Emergency Management section. And if you do find that you're in the 100-year flood zone, it's time to take some action to prevent storm surge damage. One of these preventative actions can be getting a surveyor to shoot the corners of your house. I can't stress enough how important it is to begin planning immediately. This is a very real issue, and it's only going to get more real as time goes by. We also suggest that our project be expanded to the rest of the island to incorporate all critical infrastructure.
So in summary, we just highlighted some of the issues of why storm surges is a big issue and why it's such a threat to Nantucket. We identified different infrastructure that's at risk, as well as giving recommended mitigation tactics for the future. And lastly, we identified some future steps that both the town and its residents can take to be proactive in preventing this storm surge. So a lot of people helped us along the way with this project. We had countless interviews. There's too many to thank, and we just had a couple people in particular. First was Frank Holdgate. He's a town surveyor, and he went from location to location with us, giving us very accurate elevations, which we really had no access to otherwise, and which were critical to both our findings and our recommendations. Next, we'd like to thank Peter Morrison, who's been helping us from the beginning. He took a lot of interest into it in our project and offered a lot of insight and advice to give our project a stronger argument. And then we'd like to thank our advisors, Dominic Golding and Ronald Ludwig. They've been with us this entire semester, giving us the basis that we needed for this type of project. And we'd also really like to thank them for giving us the opportunity to take part in a real-world issue like this. And lastly, our sponsor, Dave Franzuto. He really got us comfortable with the island, and he's a huge wealth of knowledge just from his own personal experiences. And if he didn't know who to talk to, or if he didn't know, he knew exactly who we could talk to get this information. And kind of just like a main lesson that we learned really from the beginning was from our first meeting with him. He said, the first thing you need to know is that Nantucketers are the most resourceful and resilient people you'll ever meet. And from our short time here, we've kind of seen this resilience and kind of forward-thinking mentality that Nantucketers have. And I think that's why we're really confident that we'll start taking the proactive steps necessary to protect against storm surge damage rather than picking up the bits and pieces of the future when this inevitable storm comes through. So that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, we'd love to answer them.
Anyone?
You mentioned that after Juno, that the higher level would be 41 inches higher than Juno?
It would be 3 feet. The 100-year flood is at 10 feet.
So that would be 3 feet higher than what Juno was. So I'd have 41 inches at the bike jump.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Did you research the damage of the infrastructure at all for Juno?
We did. We looked at IDAs, and so that's pretty much what does it stand for again?
Initial damage assessment, and it's basically just a preliminary form that's filled out just a few days after the storm hits, and it's sent to the Mass, sent off to the state government, and it's a general idea of how much damage has occurred and what the costs are to clean up, and that's how they kind of apply for when there's like state of emergencies. There's the funding involved with that, and then we tried to also look through different building permits to see what was damaged, but the issue is you can get a permit, but it doesn't really describe what it's fixing, so we didn't know if they were for fixing storm damages or if they were just like knocking down a wall to make a bigger space. So better records would have definitely helped us in seeing what's been damaged in the past.
You said the storm surge from Juneau was how high?
7.2 feet.
The surge was 4.2 if you say that the Nantucket high tide is about 3 feet.
I just want to make a comment on the database that you left us, Chris, which to me seems like a really valuable asset. And I wonder if you have any kind of broad recommendations about, number one, keeping it up to date if we don't get another team back here, and secondly, broadening it outward to areas other than just the downtown area, done perhaps by interns or people who may want to pursue this further.
Yeah, so I forgot to mention, but it's easily updatable. So the page numbers are by so there would be dividers, and so each one would be 1, 2, and 3 for built, utilities, and transportation, and then the pages will coincide within that. So it'd be 1-1 for the first one, and so on. And so you can easily add different pieces of infrastructure. It's not only secluded to the downtown area, so you can obviously expand it to the whole entire island. And also you can, based on future tactics that are going to be incorporated, like C Street Pump Station, they're already in the process of trying to get funding for their renovations. Also with the Coast Guard Station. And so with the recommendation, you can change that as well. And then so for future, if you're planning for next 100 years or so.
Peter, we intentionally set up projects so that they're incomplete in that regard.
Right. Well, another possibility would be something to privatize this, and I wonder if the board you thought about forming an LLC so that maybe 2 years from now I can ask you if you do an audit of my property and tell me what mitigation strategy I should use given what's going to happen 50 years from now, which is I'm going to have waterfront property with no road into town.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Well, one of the best parts of our project was that if you look through our report, you can see our mentality, and then you can do it for yourself. So.
It's practically free.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, moving on to, well, I guess it's infrastructure, but infrastructure of quite a different kind. We've had a team who have been working with Mike Burns in the planning office to look at the issue of handicap accessibility of both the sidewalks and the bus stops in town. So we have Lillian, Connor, and Paige. If they would like to come up, they'll tell you what they learned. Thank you.
So we're a Nantucket Accessibility Survey. We looked at the current accessibility of the sidewalks and bus stops of downtown Nantucket. I'm Lillian Lewis.
I'm Connor McGuirk.
And I'm Paige Shankati, and we would just like to thank our liaison, Mike Burns, from the Nantucket Planning Office. There's a huge problem on Nantucket where many of the sidewalks and bus stops are not accessible. There are actually some federal and state laws that advocate for accessibility. The federal laws are under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that was created in 1990 and updated in 2010. And the Massachusetts state laws are enforced by the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board, and those are in the 521 CMR. Right now Nantucket is facing many challenges, becoming more accessible based on the fact that people they don't really know where to go between accessibility versus preserving the historical character of the island. So we came up with this goal to provide different recommendations to the Nantucket Planning Office to help them improve accessibility of all of the bus stops and sidewalks while still preserving the historical character and the aesthetic feel of the island. So to go to our goal, we came up with 5 main objectives. Our first objective is to review current standards and best practices, and to do this we looked at other historic cities such as Beacon Hill in Boston and Charleston, South Carolina. Our second objective was to conduct an inventory and assessment of all the sidewalks and crosswalks of the core parking district in the old historic district of Nantucket. Our third objective is to conduct an inventory and assessment of the bus stops along 4 of the main bus routes. We looked at all of the bus stops along the Mattocket, Myacomet, Mid-Island, and Sconset bus routes. Our fourth objective was to gauge opinions of key stakeholders and decision makers on the island, and to do this we conducted a ton of interviews and we sent out an online survey. And our last objective was to evaluate different design options and make recommendations to the Nantucket Planning Office for improvements. And this is a map showing the old historic district, and the area outlined in green is the core parking district where we conducted all of our sidewalk and crosswalk surveys. And this is a map showing all of the bus stops along the Mattocket, Myacomet, Mid-Island, and Sconset bus routes.
To conduct our inventory and assessment of the sidewalks, we created 2 different surveys. One survey was looking at the individual sidewalk sections, or blocks of sidewalks, and one survey looks at the intersections. So we looked at 101 different sidewalk sections in our study area and compared them to the ADA standards. The first ADA standard that we looked at is that there should be a minimum sidewalk width, or minimum sidewalk width of 36 inches, and 91% of the sidewalks in our study area met this requirement. The next requirement that we looked at is that the maximum cross slope of the sidewalk should be 2%. The cross slope is the slope of the sidewalk going from a wall to the curb, and only 21% of the sidewalks meet this requirement. The next aspect that we looked at of the ADA is that the maximum running slope should be 5%. And the running slope is the slope of the sidewalk in the direction that the pedestrian walks. And 71% of the sidewalks in our study area met this requirement. Then we looked to see if there was a 5 by 5 foot passing area every 200 feet of sidewalk. And this is necessary in case a pedestrian needs to rest so other people will be able to pass on the sidewalk without them being in the way. And 72% of the sidewalks meet this requirement. And the last requirement that we look to see for the ADA is that there should be 32 inches of passing room around every obstruction. And an obstruction can include a tree, a bench, a post, or even a car that is parked on the sidewalk. And 88% of the sidewalks in our study area met this requirement. So based on our results, we rated the sidewalks on a scale of 1 through 5, with 1 meaning that the sidewalk is in very good condition and that it meets most ADA standards. A rating of 5 displays an area where there should be a sidewalk but there is no sidewalk, and a rating of 4 describes a sidewalk that is in poor condition and doesn't meet really any ADA standards. So the example of 1 that we provided is a sidewalk that is located on Federal Street outside of the church, and the example of a 4 that we provided is located on North Union Street near Sweet Inspirations. And to show the span of our ratings, we made a pie chart and found that the average rating of the sidewalks in our study area was a 2.21, which was a little bit better than we expected. And to better illustrate this data, I believe we've handed out this map, but we made this map in GIS software, and we color-coded the sidewalk section based on the rating. So a color of dark green displays a rating of 1, which means that the sidewalk's in very good condition. A color of the yellowish green displays a rating of 2 or good condition. A color of orange displays a sidewalk section that is in satisfactory condition, a rating of 3. And a color of red displays a sidewalk that has a rating of 4 or in poor condition. And then we circled in red the areas that we rated a 5 where there isn't a sidewalk currently, but there should be a sidewalk. Next, we looked at the intersections in our study area. So we looked at a total of 37 different intersections. And there are 2 different types of intersections in our study area. The first type is a T intersection where there should be 3 crosswalks and 6 curb ramps, and a 4-way intersection where there should be 4 crosswalks and 8 curb ramps. Based on this, there should have been a total of 125 crosswalks and 250 curb ramps, but we only found 67 crosswalks and 167 curb ramps, meaning that a lot of the features at the intersections are missing to meet ADA standards. But on the existing curb ramps and crosswalks that we found, we again based them up, or made a checklist based on ADA standards. So the first standard that we looked at is that the maximum curb ramp slope should be 8.33%, and 56% of the curb ramps in our study area met this requirement. Then we looked to see if the minimum width of the curb ramp was 36 inches, and 99% of the curb ramps meet this requirement. And then lastly, we looked to see if the minimum crosswalk width was 72 inches, and only 48% of the crosswalks in the study area meet this requirement. And the ADA also calls for these detectable warning panels. And detectable warning panels are these features that are placed on curb ramps to let a person that is visually impaired know that they have safely crossed a street. So they are different different texture and color than the curb ramp or the material of the curb ramp that they're existing on. So they're easily identifiable. But none of the curb ramps in our study area have any of these detectable warning panels.
So to address that problem, we created a detectable warning panel survey to gauge the opinions of different stakeholders and committees on the island. In our survey, we asked them to rate each detectable warning panel on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being more appropriate for Nantucket and 5 being not appropriate for Nantucket at all. And from our results, we found that these 2 detectable warning panels that are circled in green were most favorited, and the 2 detectable warning panels circled in red are least favorited. And these 2 detectable warning panels that are circled in red are actually right outside of this building.
So after looking through our findings, we wanted to compare them to actual overall accessibility, so we attempted to traverse the core parking district using a wheelchair. The wheelchair was provided to us by Tom McGlynn from the Council on Aging. We had 1 team member in the wheelchair attempting to traverse sidewalk sections, and if outside assistance was required, another team member would assist. Based on our footage and comparing them to our ratings, we found that a sidewalk we gave a rating of 1 tended to be very easily accessible and little to no outside assistance was needed. A sidewalk given a rating of 2, as the sidewalks tended to be more uneven, was much more difficult to traverse and outside assistance was often required. Sidewalks we gave a rating of 3 or 4 were almost impossible to traverse even with outside assistance.
So, in addition to surveying the sidewalks, we also surveyed 144 bus stops across the Madaket, Mycomet, Mid-Island, and Sconset routes. And again, we made a checklist based off the ADA standards for bus stops. So, the first standard that we looked at is that there should be a boarding area with a minimum size of 60 by 96 inches, and only 57% of the bus stops meet this requirement. Then, the next requirement that we looked at is that the slope of the bus stop or boarding area must be the same as the adjacent road, so a person on a boarding area will not have to step over a curb when they're getting to the bus. And only 65% of the bus stops that have a correctly sized boarding area have this slope that's the same as the adjacent road. And then lastly, then we checked to see if the bus stops were accessible by either sidewalk or pedestrian passageways such as a bike path. And only 58% of the sidewalks were accessible by these methods. And then lastly, we looked to see if the bus stops were marked. And in Nantucket, they're marked by 2 blue pieces of tape, and 97% of the bus stops have this. And again, we rated these bus stops like we did with the sidewalks on a scale of 1 through 5 based on our results. A rating of 1 is a bus stop that meets all ADA standards. It has a bus pullover area and sometimes a shelter. It's accessible by sidewalk or pedestrian passageway, and it's safe for a person to be at. And a rating of 5 describes a bus stop that is dangerous for a person to be at. It doesn't meet many ADA standards. It doesn't have a boarding area at all. It's not accessible, and sometimes it isn't even marked. So the rating of 1 that we were showing is on Surfside Road across from the Muse restaurant, and the rating of 5 is on the intersection of West Dover Street and Orange Street. And to show this data, the total span, we created a pie chart and found the average rating was a 2.67. And the Nantucket Regional Transit Authority, or the NRTA, gave us a list of the most popular bus stops along these 4 bus routes. So using GIS software, we were able to show each bus route that was most popular, and then if you zoom in, we color-coded the bus routes. So a green bus route describes or bus stop describes a bus stop that has a correctly sized boarding area, and a color of red describes a bus stop that does not have a boarding area or it's incorrectly sized.
So we did find that the majority of the sidewalks, crosswalks, and bus stops in downtown Nantucket were in reasonable condition and did meet most ADA standards. However, many more still require a lot of work in order to follow ADA compliance. We found that from interviews with stakeholders and committee members that one of the main problems for this was a lack of design and construction guidelines during the creation of these sidewalks, crosswalks, and bus stops, often having them fall into disrepair. So we provided some short-term and long-term recommendations to address this problem. For short-term, we recommended that the NPO and NRTA create guidebooks showing the most handicap-accessible routes and stops of downtown Nantucket to make them available to the public. They can put these on the Nantucket Island Guide and NRTA website specifically, and update them as more routes become more accessible. And for long term, we recommended that the NPO and NRTA, with input from the Historic District Commission and Commission on Disability, create design guidelines for the planning, construction, and maintenance of crosswalks, sidewalks, and bus stops, so that they will meet ADA standards as well as retain their historical character. We also recommended that they create a priorities list involving which sidewalks and bus stops to upgrade first, using budget and milestones to meet yearly. And so in conclusion, and to summarize, we looked at the sidewalks and bus stops of downtown Nantucket. We found the majority of them were in reasonable condition, but many still needed work. And we found that this was because of lack of design and construction guidelines, and made recommendations to appease this fact. Are there any questions?
It actually turns out the biggest surprise was that the sidewalks are actually better than we thought they'd be. A lot of people were telling us there's like a lot of problems with them, which there are, but we rated them a 2.21 overall, which is better than we thought. We thought it would be more in the 3s. But the lack of detectable warning panels is probably the biggest problem. It depends on the area. So around here, the sidewalks have detectable warning panels. They meet almost every ADA requirement. And, for example, we are at the Mariah Mitchell Association, and walking back there on Main Street, there are a lot more obstructions than in the downtown area. So it really just depends on the area that you're in. So to address this problem, we put on sunglasses at night and tried traversing the streets, but we were mainly on Main Street and Salem Street and a little bit of Washington Street, and we didn't really notice any huge problems with lighting, but as you get outside of our area, the lighting gets worse. Yes. Yeah. The Nantucket Planning Office and other committees have this plan for a few years. They're addressing one area at a time.
No, I think the team did a great job of the variety of surveying that they did. Crosswalks, the ramps, the sidewalks, the bus stops. They really took off a huge endeavor on the amount of surveying that they did, and a lot of the inputs that we got definitely going to inform a lot of the other improvements that we're
Okay, so our final two projects, we've been keeping Cara busy this term because she's been involved in both these final projects along with Greg Tivnan. The first project we're gonna present on, or the students are going to present on, Sean, Brian, and Eric are going to tell us about their assessment of the staffing and organisation of the DPW at present and in recent history. So, floor's theirs.
All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for attending today. I'm Sean Hathaway.
I'm Eric Meyer. I'm Brian Splain.
And we worked with Greg Tivnan, the Assistant Town Manager, and Carrie Buzanowski, the Director of the Department of Public Works, in our project, Assessing DPW Operations and Organization. As a quick overview for today, we're going to start by talking about our project goals, and then we'll move into our findings, which compose of our problem, perceptions, departmental functions, and then our benchmarking exercise. We'll then sum up our findings for you and then make our recommendations.
To start, we're going to go over our project goals, which were to evaluate the organization and operations of the Department of Public Works and to provide recommendations for improvement. To start with, we had to identify the problems. The first major problem we found is that the department is understaffed. As you can see on this graph, in which we have the number of employees along this axis, and then the seasonal population of the island on this axis, and the years along the x-axis, there's a general upward trend in the population every year in the for each season, and the DPW staffing has a general downward trend. There we go. So, this can be interpreted one of two ways. Either the department is operating much more efficiently, or that they are understaffed, because more people tend to create more problems and work for the department to have to address. We found that it was actually the understaffing interpretation and not that they are acting more efficiently. The next major problem we discovered was that the department is also underfunded. Again, we have the seasonal population, wrong button, seasonal population along this axis and the budget along this axis in millions of dollars. The blue line is the budget in that year's dollar value, and the orange line is adjusted for inflation. If you draw a trend line right through here, you'll see that it is relatively flat and that the buying power of the DPW has not improved over the past 15 years until the past year or so. So they are also very underfunded. The next set of problems we found were insufficient usage of technology and insufficient record keeping. These two problems go hand in hand. If there was better usage of technology, the records would have been a little bit easier to find, and we would have had more hard data to back up a lot of the points people made in our interviews. They could have also utilized technology for fleet maintenance, as the department is moving towards central fleet maintenance of all town departments instead of just their own fleet. We also found that the department is in favor of more training. The training in the department would be great because the staffing currently only has 4 or 5 people who are capable of operating all of the heavy trucks and machinery in the department. If any of these people are unavailable, it makes it a challenge for the operations manager to find a replacement to fill a task, because it's a liability to have someone who is not certified running this thing and is actually illegal. The last problem we found is that the department is underloved, as Eric will discuss in further detail.
So, to arrive at the conclusion of why the DPW feels underloved, we surveyed 25 DPW employees and we asked them, how is the DPW perceived by town administration, the Board of Selectmen, and the public? And we asked them, are they perceived well, yes or no? So regarding town administration, 57% of DPW employees said they are not perceived well. They made some comments that town administration is making an attempt, the town admin is coming down to the DPW, meeting with senior leadership, and discuss long-range plans in the future of the community. However, they do note that town admin is often lumped in with the Board of Selectmen. Now, with the Board of Selectmen, 52% said that they're not perceived well. They had some quotes that the DPW is the red-headed stepchild of the town department, and that they're paying for the sins of the previous department. This can be explained when you look at the public graph. So, 67% of the public, the largest of all the three, 67% of DPW workers thought the public did not perceive them well. They said the public doesn't know what they do and that they are called lazy and inadequate. This helps explain what we see with the Board of Selectmen, because as the board, public elects the board, and the board is responsible for what goes on. We then surveyed the town cabinet, 12 members, about departmental functions. We asked them, should these key DPW functions remain in the DPW or be moved elsewhere? Which means, should it be outsourced or moved to another town department? So the three that really stood out among respondents was public facilities maintenance, the playing field maintenance, and park maintenance. So they asked, should these be moved elsewhere? For public facilities, they were split 50-50. Half said it should stay with the DPW, half said it should stay elsewhere. But for park maintenance and playing field maintenance, by far the majority of respondents thought it should be moved elsewhere. In our interviews, we noted that wastewater management is often a standalone division of the DPW. While under the direction of the DPW director, they are often independent and autonomous in their day-to-day operations. And they are funded separately with the enterprise fund, not with general fund DPW.
Furthermore, we conducted a benchmarking exercise in which we compared Nantucket's DPW to that of 6 other Massachusetts towns. These towns are not directly comparable as Nantucket provides a large range of services and no other town provides the exact same services. However, we compared specific functions and other metrics to provide a standard to see how Nantucket fares with these other towns. In our first comparison here, we look at population per DPW full-time equivalent, or FTE. In 2010, the census reported that Nantucket's population is 10,399. The DPW has 18 full-time equivalents to accommodate for this population, giving them a metric of 578 population per FTE. As you can know, the average of other towns is 374 people per FTE, which is about 200 less than that of Nantucket. This indicates that Nantucket's Department of Public Works at a season is understaffed. Furthermore, in the summer, Nantucket's population increases up to 65,000 people. This is about a 525% increase from the year-round population. The DPW hires an additional 7 employees to accommodate for this increase in in population, bringing their metric to 2,600 people per FTE. This is now about 900 more than that of the other seasonal towns, indicating that not only is the DPW understaffed out of season, but they're more so understaffed in season. Lastly, we looked at winter stresses that any Massachusetts town will face. That is snow plowing. Other towns are able to contract out some of their work to better provide for their community in a more effective and efficient manner. However, Nantucket is unable to do so, so their 10 plow vehicles have to each, on average, maintain or plow 9.74 miles of public road. This is about triple that of the other 6 towns, indicating that not only does Nantucket need more staffing to operate equipment, but they need more equipment to maintain these roads. To summarize up our findings, we saw that Nantucket's Department of Public Works has been heading in the right directions, as we found in surveys and interviews. However, they are still having problems with staffing. They're understaffed, as we saw in our benchmarking exercise, compared to the standard of other towns. In addition, these employees are also overworked, and this is due to their broad scope of services. The department continues to grow without raising their staffing levels at all. They also have ineffective use of technology, which can hurt them when they're out doing their work. If they use technology more effectively, if they have more technology available, they could provide more efficient services, allowing them to possibly help with their understaffing. We also saw that DPW employees feel as though they're negatively perceived by the Board of Selectmen, town administration, and the public in general. And lastly, we found that the DPW has insufficient record keeping, as most of their records are currently in paper form. As a result, they cannot make hard justifications for increases in staffing and budget.
To address these issues, we've come up with some recommendations. The first major recommendation we have reached is that the department needs to hire additional staffing. These staffing do not necessarily need to be trained right away, but they should be trained over time to reach better operations so the department can function better. There are some caveats to this, however. Finding staff is difficult, and the major issue is housing. All departments in town struggle with housing, and the DPW is not alone in this struggle. We came up with 3 possible solutions for this housing problem. The first being that the DPW pay for people to commute over from the mainland. This is a very expensive option, costing between $15,000 to $20,000 per year per employee. And also, ferries do not tend to run in the winter as often because they can be canceled due to storms. And DPW is very important in emergency management in storms because they have to plow the roads so police and fire may respond to emergency situations. The next possible recommendation plays into a future recommendation of the School to Work program. In this program, students will be hired. After this program, students can be hired and will be able to work from their homes, presumably living with their parents. This would provide temporary housing relief for this department, but these people will eventually need their own housing. The final recommendation we came up for housing is that the department provide housing in the town, whether they build a campus at Fairgrounds or at some other location. This is the best long-term solution, but it will take time to get off the ground. The next major recommendation we had is that they incentivize training. This training incentivization will allow for the department to have more qualified staff running all the heavy machinery and allow for an easier time for the operations manager assigning tasks throughout the day. To incentivize training, we came up with two major possibilities. The first being that they provide bonus pay for reaching these, for obtaining licensure, and the second being that they could get additional vacation time for receiving licensure. The third recommendation we have is the vision, focusing the department onto core tasks. To do this, we would recommend splitting off 3 different departments and allowing the department to focus its task. These departments are the wastewater, parks and recreation, and facilities management departments. As can be seen in this figure, we are also proposing with this a new position at the cabinet level to alleviate pressures on town management for new departments in town being formed. This would be the creation of a Public Works Cabinet Director. This position would be assumed by the DPW Director and would answer to the cabinet level positions and would be utilized as a means to have the 3 department heads just have someone to confront to as a funneling up effect. The 3 department heads would operate independently every other day and only have to answer to the Public Works Director for managerial purposes. The Public Works Director would also still be in charge of the main direct functions of the DPW, as can be seen in the lower left corner of the screen. The next recommendation we have is the department needs to improve its public image. To do so, we've come up with 2 possibilities of a civics course, which would instruct the population about what the DPW is, what it does, how it prioritizes tasks, try and have people understand the DPW better. The next one is, as I previously mentioned, the School to Work program. In its current iteration, the program works as students will attend the department for a certain period of a day, and maybe in the police department to see what it's like to work in this department, which is a great educational opportunity. However, in its current form, the students have a very narrow scope on what they can learn. So we're proposing they broaden the scope into a rotational program where they rotate through various departments such as police, fire, DPW, natural resources, which will have a benefit of broadening the scope of the students' education and would allow them to see what it would be like to serve the government in various capacities and create a pipeline for jobs in not just the Department of Public Works, but police and fire as well. The next recommendation we have is to improve the use of technology and equipment. Some equipment is still 20 years old and is a liability because if it breaks down, it's prone to a catastrophic failure because older equipment tends to be prone to these types of failures. There's also the need for improved technology. The technology such as fleet management software would allow for easier maintenance of the town's vehicles as they approach a general fleet management role. Also, we're recommending that there is additional support and record keeping throughout the town. This record keeping would better allow for justification for DPW staffing expansions and purchases.
So, in conclusion, we talked about our project goals, which were to assess the organizations and operations of the DPW. We then looked at the problems the DPW is facing, namely they are understaffed, underfunded, have insufficient technology usage and data collection, and have a lack of training incentives, and are unloved. To arrive at these perceptions, we surveyed the town administration, the Board of Selectmen, and we surveyed the DPW employees about the town administration, Board of Selectmen, and the public, and the employees all thought they were seen in a negative way. We asked them about departmental functions to the town cabinet, and they recommended, were in favor of but moving 3 other sections elsewhere, which would be playing field maintenance, park maintenance, and wastewater. And then We would like to thank our sponsors, Greg Tivinen and Kara Bruzanowski, for helping us through these past 4 months and with our project, our advisors, Professor Ludwig and Golding, and for their great patience while we wrote this paper and conducted our project, and to all the DPW employees who made this possible. That concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Great.
Among your recommendations, what would you prioritize as the top 3?
I think definitely one of the first ones would be to increase the staffing, as that will immediately start to show they'll be able to do more projects and fulfill all the services that they list. I think second would also be the reorganization, breaking out wastewater, parks and recreation, and public facilities. Doing so, it wouldn't add any pressure onto the town administration. However, it will allow them to be more independent, and also these roles are more glamorous, so that they'll be able to get more staffing through there. And I think our the third for our top 3 would be improving technology use, as it'll be able to make them a little bit more efficient, and it'll have tasks more laid out clearly. Yes, Gar.
Did you envision moving those 3 functions away from the DPW site, or just giving them defined personnel?
So we did look at that. However, one of the problems that town administration has faced is previously they had several departments all funneling into them. They then were able to make cabinets, so it directed it gave the town manager less to directly have reported to. And doing this, these departments would be on their own. However, they would report to the cabinet director in order to not add additional any additional work to the town manager with her current heavy workload. Yes.
Just a comment and a question after that. The comment is you have a graphic on there about plowing, and I just note on there that the community maintains a mile bike path in the community in Commonwealth. You don't want to add like another 30 miles, 35 miles to be a mileage equivalent to plows.
Right.
Very high community.
Go to the next one. Next. No, other way. Go to the big matrix.
Big matrix, all right.
So we actually looked at more than just those 3 functions. It's this and then even more. But we did ask about bike paths, but it wasn't clear in our data collection how they were maintained. However, if our project was to be furthered, we would be talking to these 6 towns further to get better metrics on that. So the seasonal population over the past few years was determined through several articles that we found online. They might be able to talk about that.
So we were looking for sort of hard data, and it was not very readily available. The closest we could find were ferry traffic and plane and bake embarkments at the airport. And other than that, I know past project has looked at trash usage. So these are sort of anecdotal evidence on the population, which was, given the amount of time we had, it was not well within the scope of our project.
Are there any other questions? Well, with that, thank you very much.
Okay, last but not least, we had a team that was looking at, actually it's a follow-on from a project we did 4 years ago, on public roads. So we've got Kevin, Paige, and Andrew, who are going to talk to us about the project they work with Cara on, looking at private roads on Nantucket, sorry.
So our project was on evaluating long-term management strategies for the maintenance of private roads on Nantucket.
I'm Kevin Willett. I'm studying robotics engineering.
I'm Allison Paquin. I'm studying biomedical and mechanical engineering.
And I'm Andrew Mon, and I'm studying management information systems.
And we'd like to thank our sponsor, Kara Buznowski, the director of the Nantucket Department of Public Works.
So here's the problem. 64% of the roads on Nantucket are privately owned. You can see where they are on this map, with public roads in blue and private roads in red. Now, what does it mean for a road to be privately owned? Well, it means that the town has no responsibility for the road. And so all maintenance, repairs, and plowing done on the road must be both organized and funded by the abutters, or the people who live alongside the road and therefore own it. Now, there are many examples on Nantucket of well-maintained private roads. However, there are also many examples of poorly maintained private roads. Unpaved roads in particular are notorious for being in poor condition, as they require maintenance after almost every rainfall. Up here on the screen, you can see two images of roads in poor condition. And you can also see in these images a number of common issues with poorly maintained roads. On the picture of Eel Point, you can see the large amounts of overgrowth that are on both sides of the road. You can also see how narrow the road is, despite being two-way. Rugged Road also has issues with overgrowth and is also very narrow. However, most prevalent are the large potholes, which have now filled with water. Issues like these can significantly slow response times of emergency personnel, and so they present a major safety risk to abutters of the road. Another issue with private roads revolves around poor street signs. Many private roads have small or difficult to read street signs, such as this one on Washington Avenue, which would be difficult to read from a car and near impossible to read from a large fire engine. Some streets simply don't have a street sign. And so, without prior knowledge of the area, finding a house in need would be very difficult in the event of an emergency. And so response times could potentially be significantly increased. Another issue with private roads revolves around easements. Now, the legal definition for an easement is a right to use over the property of another. This simply means that one individual has the right to use a portion of land owned by another individual. Utilities companies commonly use easements to bury their equipment. They put it alongside the road within an easement. You can see a recent easement here along Skyline Drive. It's the dirt strip following the road. Now the problem is, when a road is poorly maintained, these easements can lose their dirt coverage, exposing the equipment underneath. This, as you might expect, is a major safety hazard to abutters of the road who use it every day. The last issue I'll touch upon with private roads has to do with discontinuous and paper roads. Now, a discontinuous road is one which stops at a certain point and then picks up again at a later point. And so Washington Avenue is a good example of a discontinuous road, as you can see 3 distinct breaks in the green line that depicts the length of Washington Avenue. Paper roads, on the other hand, are roads which appear on a map but either do not actually exist or do not extend as far as the map would suggest. In both cases, these roads limit the rate at which emergency personnel can reach In both cases, these roads increase emergency personnel response times, as without prior knowledge of the area, someone can get turned around. And so these are some of the issues that we were faced with when starting this project.
So the goals and objectives of our project are as follows. The goal of our project was to evaluate long-term management strategies for the maintenance of private roads and to recommend appropriate solutions for Nantucket. To do this, we first looked at current management plans on the island. Then we looked at current maintenance practices that are currently applied. Then we looked at best practices in comparable towns. Finally, we created a list of criteria to prioritize the taking of roads and applied this to select roads on the island. Throughout the course of the term, we conducted 23 different interviews, 11 with town officials, 5 with Homeowners Association presidents, 4 with DPW directors, including Kara Buznowski, and 3 others with 2 utility workers and a real estate agent.
All right, now let's talk about some of Nantucket's current plans. Recently, the town has taken the boulevard and the Surfside area of the island and has plans to take 3 more roads that connect to it. including Lovers Lane, Okerwa, and Monahans roads. Right now, the DPW has a 10-year capital plan. The capital plan includes the taking and design phases of the takings of some of these roads, and in some cases, the construction costs. The first 3 roads, which I've just highlighted for you, are Friendship Lane, Somerset Road, and Wynn Street. These 3 roads are being considered because they would reduce traffic on Quaker Street and Prospect Street. The next 2 I've highlighted are Amelia Drive and Tacoma Way to Lovers Lane. These 2 are being considered to reduce traffic on Old South Road. In each of these examples, taking means that the town is going to convert the ownership status of the road from private to public, and then becomes responsible for the maintenance of the road and also seasonal concerns like plowing. So now let's talk about abutter education. Out of the 20 homeowners associations that we interviewed during the course of the project, we learned that 50% of them allocate money towards road maintenance, and then a little over half of them have dues that are less than or equal to $100. As you can imagine, with this sum of money, it can be difficult for all homeowners associations to necessarily take care of all of their roads. One of our findings was that homeowners associations with larger dues tend to have roads that are in better condition. Of course, you might live on a private road and you might not be a part of a homeowners association at all. In that case, all of the abutters along that road are solely responsible for the maintenance of the roads. Here are 2 examples of private roads on the island. This first one, Arkansas Avenue, was fixed by its abutters as recently as 3 years ago and addressed the concerns like the pothole you see in the photo. The second example is Eat Fire Springs Road. One abutter along this road collects money from other homeowners in order to address the gullies that are formed on the side of the road after extended periods of rainfall. This abutter does this once every few years and pools together money from the people that live along the road in order to hire a contractor. The contractor can then come in and take care of these issues. However, some people that live on private roads may not necessarily know how to address the problems that they face, like the potholes and the gullies and the other concerns. So for that reason, we recommend that the town distribute private road maintenance information to people that live along private roads. This information could be as simple as a web page on the town website. It could be an informational brochure that you mail to homeowners, or you could even set up an informational form in which those that live on private roads are invited to.
So next we looked at some compared towns and their practices that they apply for maintaining private roads. The towns that we looked at included Barnstable, Eastham, Wellfleet, Dedham, Franklin, and North Attleboro. When looking at the towns, we realized that seasonal towns, which are towns that have an increased population in the summer, have significantly higher percentages of private roads compared to non-seasonal towns. From this graph, you can see in gray that seasonal towns, the percentage of seasonal towns, and then the non-seasonal towns are in green. Nantucket still has the highest percentage of private roads at 64%. Each of these towns have different methods for maintaining their private roads. The seasonal towns have begun to implement snow plowing policies that set standards for the surface type, the surface width, the vertical, and the roadside clearance, and then if a street sign is required or not. Eastham and Wellfleet have already implemented their programs, and Barnstable has drafted a program that is waiting approval. The table here shows the standards that Eastham and Wellfleet have set for these programs. These policies incentivize abutters living along a private road to maintain their road to these standards. It is a voluntary program. Only roads that comply with the standards will be plowed, but the abutters on the roads are not required to meet these standards. Through our interviews of town officials, we found that many town officials think that a program like this would be a good idea to implement on Nantucket, but it would need to be adapted appropriately. Through our interview with homeowners association presidents, we found that they were most concerned with the roadside clearance that Eastham and Wellfleet's policies require. So we recommend that Nantucket draft a snow removal policy such as these, but that they adapt the standards that the program requires so that it alleviates these concerns. We do realize that this would put a larger burden on the DPW department, and thus support the recommendation from the prior team of increasing staffing to allow this policy to be implemented.
Some other practices that these towns use to maintain their private roads include Barnstable and North Attleboro's focus on town-funded maintenance. We do not think this is a good policy for Nantucket to implement because it is a short-term solution. It allows them to go and repair the road, but it does not give them the responsibility to continue maintenance of the road. Eastham and Dedham, on the other hand, focus on the taking of private roads. This is a good solution for Nantucket because it allows them to repair the road and then continue to maintain it because it will be their responsibility. So this is a long-term solution. The only problem with this solution is the number of roads on the island. You cannot take them all at once. So you need to prioritize which roads are taken.
And so our last objective for this project was to create a checklist of criteria which the town can utilize when determining whether or not, or when determining how to prioritize roads for future takings. The handout we've provided you is shown up here. It includes our complete list of criteria that we have defined, as well as all the data we've collected on the 3 roads we used as examples of how to apply our criteria. These roads being Somerset Road from Friendship Lane to Vesper Lane, Millbrook Road, and Warren's Landing Road. On the back side of that sheet is a short description of all of the criteria that we have defined. The Roads and Right-of-Way Committee currently has a priority road takings list that includes a list of criteria that they use to prioritize the roads. However, this list is very short and it's also very anecdotal, and the methods for assessment are very subjective. And so our first goal when creating this new checklist of criteria was to make it more extensive. And so we've included criterion such as the number of whether or not the road is within the bounds of a homeowners association, and how much that homeowners association spends on road maintenance per member, whether or not a bike route is in the area of the road, the number of structures along the road, and also the amount it would cost the town to pave the road if it were taken. Our other goal with creating this list of criteria was to ensure that we had quantifiable ways to assess each. And so for level of use, we conducted traffic counts along each major intersection of the roads we examined. Similarly, for the road condition value, we conducted road evaluations on each road using a method created by a previous WPI project conducted in 2012 on the island. Now, we recommend that the town utilize this list of criteria as well as the methods for assessment we have defined in our report in order to prioritize roads for future takings. It is our hope that this list of criteria will streamline future takings by providing numerous quantifiable reasons why a road should or should not be taken.
All right, so let's summarize those recommendations now. Our first recommendation is that the town draft an adapted snow removal policy for the private roads on the island. Second, we believe that the town should distribute private road maintenance information through one or more mediums, so people that do live on private roads and maybe don't know how to take care of the roads can learn how to do so. And lastly, the town should continue to prioritize takings of roads, but using the presented list of criteria that we've just shown you. Are there any questions?
I don't believe we have, though we haven't actually been looking, so it's very possible that there are some out there that you could use as an example. Mm-hmm.
Hi, well, in interviewing homeowners in particular, did you run into any Nantucketers who did not want roads paved?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Many. One of the recommendations we got specifically for the snow removal program, in Eastham and Wellfleet, those programs require a road to be paved. However, one of the recommendations we got from someone here on the island was that the town consider making this program usable on unpaved roads. This may increase the number of roads which will be brought up to the standards required by such a plan.
It would seem to me that there are some services that the town could provide to private roads that might already be paved that have failed infrastructure, like storm drains that have failed, etc. currently, I think, to pump out a storm drain, you have to bring in a truck from off island, et cetera. That issue at all.
We discussed doing, we sort of called, I believe we called that minimal maintenance, and we discussed this with Kara, and her main concern was that by conducting minimal maintenance, clearing a single storm drain or maybe clearing brush, essentially having the DPW act as a private contractor, in the past they've gotten many complaints after going in and doing this, saying you didn't cut back the brush enough, you didn't do everything you were going to say they were going to do. So she prefers, if there is going to be some sort of town-funded maintenance on private roads, that she would prefer if they went in and made the road perfect, essentially, did everything for the road. And so just having little jobs like clearing a storm drain is probably not ideal, at least for Nantucket. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, all of those who came today. I hope you enjoyed the presentations. I think the teams have all done a marvellous job on their projects this term. It's been a pleasure working with them. I hope you've enjoyed working with them. And we hope that we've left you with some useful things to do and think about. As I said earlier, it'd be great if we've left a few loose ends so that we can come back and try and fill them in the future. So if anybody's got any ideas of other projects they'd like to float, I'm always happy to hear them, whether now or sometime in the future. The presentations today, as I said earlier, will be available on Channel 18. They will be the papers will be posted on the town website, and both the presentations and the papers will be available on the WPI Project Centre website as well. I'll probably send around a reminder when those things are posted, so you'll get the URLs that you need to access that information then. If anybody has any questions from me, I'm more than happy to entertain them, either here or afterwards. I would like to thank again Harvey and Young's Bicycle Shop for providing us all with bikes for the entire time that we're here. It's been great. I hope when he gets the bikes back, he finds that we haven't abused them too much. Similarly, I'd like to thank Mariah Mitchell for providing housing for the students. And similarly, I hope we haven't abused that facility too much. So we'll be invited back next year. I look forward to seeing all of you in May and June, perhaps. There'll be two of my colleagues who will be back here advising next year. I'm being sent off to New Zealand instead. But I'm specialising in islands, so I hope I'll be back the following year. I'd like to thank my colleague Reinhold for being such a good person to work with this entire time. It's been a pleasure. And once again, thanks to you all for being an audience and for being so supportive of what we do on the island. Appreciate it.